everyone. My name is Vanessa Sewell. I'm a proud Worimi woman from the mid-north coast of New South Wales, currently living here on Anaiwan land. I'm a current PhD candidate at the University of New England, an Associate Lecturer in Indigenous Knowledges and a lecturer through the Orala Centre. I would like to begin tonight by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we all stand tonight, the Anaiwan people. I pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I would like to welcome everyone to this amazing event tonight with a special and warm welcome to all attending members of the Archibald family. I would like to ask everyone for a moment's silence for respect for those who have passed in our community, especially members of the Archibald family. Thank you. I would like to draw everyone's attention to this beautiful painting painted by Alice Mackenzie, who was the granddaughter of Frank and Sarah Archibald and has since passed. This painting shows the 8 daughters of Frank and Sarah Archibald, indicating the importance of family to Frank and Sarah. The apologies for tonight include Dr. Colin Ahoy, the UNE Elder in Residence and great-grandson of Frank and Sarah Archibald. However, he will be joining us on Zoom. Can I please ask that if you have not already, that you turn off your mobile phones or do not disturb. UNE's Frank Archibald Memorial Lecture has been held as part of the university's calendar since 1986 and is dedicated to Frank Archibald, his family, and Aboriginal people of our regions. Tonight's event is especially important this year as UNE celebrates its 70th year of offering tertiary education in the region. The lecture is presented by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander speakers who are leading professionals in fields such as education, law, social justice, government and the arts. I would now like to introduce Larissa Ahoy to give a welcome to country. Larissa is the great-great-granddaughter of Frank and Sarah Archibald and the Cultural Officer here at the Orala Centre.
Dangana. As Vanessa stated, my name is Larissa Ahoy. I am the daughter of Colin Ahoy, the granddaughter of Barbara Ahoy, the great-granddaughter of Ethel Mackenzie, and the great-great-granddaughter of Sarah and Frank Archibald. I have 6 children of my own and 1 grandson. I come from the Armidale Mission, also known as Silver City or Narwan Village. The term Narwan, or Narwan, as grandfather would say it, refers to the Anaiwan land and its people, and also became the name of our Aboriginal football team, the mighty Narwan Eels. Grandfather Archibald was a proud Gumbaynggirr man, and first and foremost, a family man. Everywhere he went, his family was always there with him. Grandfather and Granny moved from place to place, including La Perouse and Burnt Bridge. This was because they were dodging the welfare, and they finally settled down out at East Armidale, the original dump. They would build their homes with corrugated iron and anything else they could find worth utilising. This is why it was called Silver City. The Catholic Church was very important to Grandfather and Granny. The church had helped build the first house on the Mish, which was called the White House. And it was Grandfather Frank's and Granny Sarah's. This house was a refuge for women and kids where people would go when they needed help, and Grandfather Frank was respected because of this. Everything he did was for the betterment of his family and his people. He was a lawman, a clever man, an educated man. He was also a warrior. He saw how badly our people had been treated and he protested and writ letters to try and change the conditions that our people were living in. This ongoing legacy is why we celebrate grandfather and granny's achievements in our annual memorial lecture. Inja newan kyuna, Inja nyambika kyuna, nyambika urala, anandaka, nyangandaka kyunanga, nyangandaka wangan, ndaka rakyana nyambika kyunda, nerima ronyura Inja kyunda. Our people, the Snow people, have called this high country our home since the beginning of time. Our ancient connections and relationships with our neighbours from other parts of the tablelands, the plains and the coast continue to this day. I would like to welcome you all here this evening on Newan country. I'd like to acknowledge our elders, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to thank and acknowledge our guest tonight, Dr. Stan Grant, Uncle Dick Vale, Uncle Danny Vale, Auntie Hazel Green, and a special acknowledgement to Uncle Doug Archibald and Uncle Norm Archibald, otherwise known as Frank Archibald Jr. And to all our elders from whichever nation you come from, you are all welcome here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. I would like to acknowledge some special people here tonight as well. Dr. Stan Grant, our guest speaker for this evening, Professor Chris Moran, the Vice-Chancellor and CEO at UNE, all members of the Archibald family who are present here tonight, and all members of UNE Executive. Tonight's presentation will go for about 40 minutes, or 40 minutes, and then there will be 20 minutes at the end for questions. And everyone who's watching this online can post a question on the online portal. So I would now like to welcome Stan Grant. Stan Grant. I have a little spiel about him. Stan Grant is a renowned journalist, author, moral philosopher, thinker, filmmaker, and communicator. He's had a groundbreaking 4-decade career as one of Australia's most awarded journalists. A Wiradjuri, Kamilaroi and Darawal man, Stan has blazed a trail for First Nations journalists. In a career of firsts, he was the first Indigenous political correspondent, the first Indigenous foreign correspondent, the first Indigenous person to present a prime-time commercial television news and current affairs program. He also has a role as Vice-Chancellor's Chair of Australian Indigenous Belonging at Charles Sturt University, and prior to this, Chair of Indigenous Affairs at Charles Sturt since 2016. Mr. Grant's list of awards include 3-time winner of Australia's highest journalism honour, the Walkley Award, 4-time winner of the prestigious Asia TV Awards, and an Australian TV Elogia Award, and many more. He holds a Doctor of Letters from the University of New South Wales and has completed his Doctor of Theology with Charles Sturt University. And he continues to write for national and international news publications. It's pretty impressive. I now hand you over to Stan Grant to present the 2024 Frank Archibald Memorial Lecture.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that really kind introduction. Thank you to all of you for turning out tonight. It really means a lot. My deepest respect to the Ngunnawal people for having me here on your land, to the Gumbanga people also, and the Dunghutti people who also share in the community that we gather on today. Thank you to the Archibald family for inviting me and for being so generous. And I've spent the afternoon with members of the Archibald family, and they made me feel like family. So thank you so much for having me here. Professor Moran, Vice-Chancellor, and your family, again, thank you for being so welcoming and for extending this opportunity to speak to you. Other First Nations people in the room, my respects to your people as well, and from wherever you have travelled, and to everybody else. Your story has brought you here too, and you are the last stop on your ancestors' journeys, and you are now part of us as well. So welcome to all of you. Before I came to speak tonight, I thought I'd have a look at a few past Archibald lectures. All wonderful speakers, talking about things of great importance. Importance to Australia, importance to our people. And one struck me particularly, Dr. Ray Kelly.
Yes, my brother.
Your brother, part of this community and part of this family. And
His mother painted that.
he painted that. Well, I stand here tonight in his shadow as well, someone I deeply admire. And I was really struck by the way that he spoke about Grandfather Frank, as he called him. And he said he always remembers him walking proud. Walking proud. And when he said it, I could see the pride in Ray. And I look at that photo of Frank Archibald, and I see not just a proud man, but someone who could have been my own grandfather. When I look at his face, I see the faces of my grandfathers. My grandfather Keith, who was a Gamilaroi man from Coonabarabran, someone who was born under a tree, who lost the use of one of his lungs as a baby, whose mother passed away giving birth to him, who was brought up on the fringes of town, who had the audacity to love a white woman, who had the audacity to love him, and endured the rejection and the hatred of a country in 1930s Australia that would not accept that love. My grandfather and my grandmother lived in a little tin humpy on the outskirts of Coonabarabran. There they raised 13 children, losing 2 of them young, until one night the police came at gunpoint and bulldozed the little humpy to the ground. The love between my grandparents couldn't possibly last. But even after they separated, my grandfather moved from one home to another, he would always sit by a window and look down the river at where my grandmother was living in a caravan and dream of the love that they had together. And I stand here tonight as the person that those people and that love made me. I think about my other grandfather on my father's side, a Wiradjuri man who fought a war for this country as a rat of Tobruk in World War II, to come back to a place where he was still not fully recognised as a citizen. Where, when he finally, after many years, marched on Anzac Day, he was turned away from the pub by the police, where he couldn't go in and share a drink with the mates that he'd served with. But he always told me about that day. He told me about something very special that happened. That as he stood there and the policeman said, "You can't come in here," the mates that he'd served with formed a circle around him and marched him in. I live with the legacy of my grandfathers, my grandmothers. I live with the legacy of all of my people. They are what have made me. The great Polish poet Czesław Miłosz, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature, once said, "What if all memories are just the memories of wounds?" The memories of wounds. And yes, our memories are hard memories. Our history is a hard history. That history doesn't just form me. I am that history. As Aboriginal people, those stories are passed down to us. From childhood, we learn the stories of who we are, where we come from, who our people are, and the things that have happened on our land. I was born in the early 1960s to a Wiradjuri father, Gamilaroi mother, living on the fringes of Australia. As I've later described it, Australia was a foreign place. Australia was for other people. We were a black family and we were a poor family. Dad got work wherever he could, and Mum helped him out with whatever work she could find. It meant for the first 13 years of my life, we were homeless. When I stand here today, it's almost impossible to think that the little boy that was born on the fringes of Australia would grow up to travel the world, to see things unimaginable, to sit in the White House with Barack Obama, the first black president of the United States, to sit with Nelson Mandela, the first black president of South Africa, to have reported from more than 80 countries. But I am always that little boy. I want to show you a photo. It is the only photo that exists of me at school. We moved around so much that I barely went to school. I changed schools 13 or 14 times before I was even into high school. If we could get that photo up on the screen. I'm the little boy, just second from the end in the middle row in front of the teacher. That's Braidwood's second grade in 1971, which will tell you how old I am. I was probably only at that school for 6 weeks, just long enough to have the photo taken, and I cannot remember the name of a single other kid in that photo. And it looks like any other school photo, except when you look a little bit more closely. Look closely at that photo. My uniform doesn't match the other kids. My jumper is a second-hand jumper Mum got. There's a stain that runs down the front of it. Look at the eyes of that little boy. They're terrified. That little boy looks out onto the world with eyes of fear. Look closely at his hands. Look how tightly that little boy is gripping his hands. By the time I was in second grade, I'd learned some things about the world. That little boy knew that he was black, and he was poor, and he did not belong. The very first memory I have of school is sitting on the floor in kindergarten and a little white boy in the class putting his arm next to mine and saying, "Why are you so black? Why are you so black?" There's no answer to that question. I can still remember how I felt and the little nervous smile that I got on my face because I didn't know what that meant. I was from a Wiradjuri family, a Gamilaroi family. I didn't know what it means to be black, to be different. But that little boy was not just asking me to explain the colour of my skin. He was teaching me a lesson about where I belonged in the world. Think about that. That little boy never had to ask why he was so white. Never would have occurred to him. The teacher was white. The other kids in the class were white. The people who worked in the shops that we stopped at on the way home from school were white. The people on television were white. To be white was normal. He wasn't just asking me an innocent question about the colour of my skin. He knew, even at the age of 5, he knew that he had the right to ask me that question. He knew that he had the power to ask me that question. And there's no answer to that question. Because whatever answer you give, it will not be good enough. Why are you so black? Are you even human? We know, Aboriginal people, what that question means. Because that question meant that our land could be taken. That question meant that we could be locked up on missions and reserves. That meant that our children could be taken from us. To be black was something that you had to explain. I told another little boy, another Aboriginal boy in one of the other classes, he was the adopted son of the Presbyterian minister and his wife. We rushed home that afternoon. He told his mother, "Mum, someone asked Dan today why he's so black. Are we black?" And I can still remember what his mother said. His mother said, "No, you're not black. You've just got lovely olive skin." In one day, I learned something about the world. I learned that a little boy had the right to ask me to explain myself. I knew there was no answer to that question. And I was told that to be black was something to be ashamed of. It wasn't long after that my mother walked in on me having a bath, and I was rubbing my skin red raw. And she asked me what I was doing, and I said, "I'm trying to rub the black off." What a terrible thing to do to a little boy. Not to say that we should be proud of who we are, not to say that the colour of our skin is something special, not to say that we come from a great culture, a great civilization, not to say that we are loved, but to say you should be ashamed of yourself. And for a little boy to know that the colour of his skin was something he wanted to get rid of. I moved around so often that I barely got an education at all. But everywhere I went, we were that black family, that poor family. When I say poor, I don't mean are we going to be able to pay the rent or the electricity or whether we could get the fridge fixed. I'm saying I don't know if we'll eat tonight. My father lost the tips of 3 of his fingers working in sawmills trying to put food on our table. His body was like a battleground. He wore the wounds of a country that had been so brutal. On his shoulder is a stab wound the size of a 50-cent piece. On his foot is a steel plate. He put the huge lump on his foot that he can't put his shoe over the top of. He's got tattoos up his arms and across his chest. He would come home exhausted every day from whatever work he could find, just for a simple meal, maybe a hot bath, and then back up to do it again. My mother would swallow her pride to knock on the door of churches to ask for food relief. I can still remember what it felt like to go with my mother into the shop, walk up and down the aisle, adding up everything that we got so that it didn't go over the amount that the church had given us, and then waiting until everyone else had left the shop so that we could go up there and hand over the little piece of paper that meant that we could eat tonight. When I think about my childhood, I don't think about a home because we didn't have one. I don't think about a school because I was rarely there. I think about a car at night on a lonely, dark road with 4 kids crammed into the back seat, my grandfather often there with us, my mother and my father in the front seat. And on those long, dark nights when we were travelling looking for somewhere to belong, some way in, I'd listen to my parents and I'd look at them. My mother sometimes would light up a cigarette. She never smoked, but she'd always light up the cigarette and she'd pass it across to my father. And I always thought that there was something so beautiful, so intimate in that little act of love. In that car was all we had. in that car was all of our hope. The hope that maybe in another place, maybe tomorrow, things would be better. Every mile they travelled, every indignity they suffered, every time someone didn't serve them in a shop, every time someone turned us away, their pride and their love grew stronger. And that's put me here today. The way that I grew up, the history that I grew up with, that is so familiar to other Aboriginal people here tonight, means that I've always asked one question. The one question that's haunted me no matter where I've gone. How do you live with dignity in a world of catastrophe? That's what Ray was saying about grandfather Frank. Look at that photo of that man. What do you see? You see dignity. Dignity. Our people, our old people, have such pride and such dignity and such love. And I always wondered, where did Mum and Dad get the dignity to go on? Let me put it another way. You get your guts kicked out. You get turned away from a country that doesn't want you. You endure hatred and racism. Then try to love. Try to love in the face of hate. That's what our people do. My life has been ridiculous. It's been beyond anything I could possibly have imagined. The little question that I was asked on that kindergarten floor, why are you so black, it never ended. When I was 14 years old, I was called up to the principal's office with other Aboriginal kids at Griffith High School. And the principal told us, and I've never forgotten that day, he said, you will amount to nothing. You will amount to nothing. What a thing to say to 14-year-old kids. He said, it's better you leave school because there's no place for you here. Some of the boys I was with that day did leave school, and some of those boys are no longer alive. I got lucky. I got so lucky. We moved away to Canberra. My father got another job. We moved to another town. My sister and I were the only Aboriginal kids in the school. It didn't get any easier. On the first day of school, I had to stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I told them about who I was and where I was from. I told them about being a Wiradjuri person. I told them about my family. And I came back in after recess to find written on the blackboard, and apologies for the language, be kind to Stan. Abos need love too. Never ends. It didn't end. But my parents would never allow me to surrender our dignity. They raised me for something better. I got so lucky. I got lucky to go to university. I got lucky to get into journalism and to have a career that's taken me around the world. And wherever I went, I've asked that one question. How do you live with dignity in a world of catastrophe? How do you love when you've lost everything? I've seen love in the worst places. I couldn't even begin to tell you about the horrible things that I've seen as a reporter. I covered war in Iraq and Afghanistan. I worked in Jerusalem and Gaza and the West Bank. I covered war in Syria. I've seen the worst of what we can do. I've stood in bombed out marketplaces where the blood on the ground was so thick that it stuck to the soles of my shoe, where mothers picked out bits of burning flesh because it's all they had left to bury of their children. I've seen the worst of what we can do. And in the worst places, I've seen human dignity and human love. I'm often asked, What's the most important story you've done? Who are the most impressive people you've interviewed? And I've interviewed a lot of impressive people, but no one more impressive than simple people living in the face of catastrophe. I remember once in Pakistan, after an earthquake, where more than 200,000 people had been killed, entire villages had disappeared. And I was driving back one evening and I saw a tent in the middle of a field and a lonely light. And I stopped and I said to my cameraman, let's go across there. We got to the tent and there was a mother out the front and she was cooking food on an open fire. Inside the tent was a man and his 2 children. This family had lost their home in the earthquake. Their eldest son had been killed and was buried under the rubble. They couldn't even find his body. The father had carried his other son, who had a broken leg and broken ribs. He carried him for 40 kilometres down the side of a mountain to come to a place where they could get a tent and some food relief. All they had in the world was in that little tent. And when the mother finished cooking the food, the first thing she did was offer it to me. Can you believe that? The love of people. To offer food to a stranger before they would eat when they have lost everything. I've seen the strength of the human spirit everywhere. And it took a toll on me. Covering war, covering the worst of the world, laid me low. Because I wasn't just reporting the suffering of other people, I was being reminded of the suffering of my own people. That mother that cooked that food, that's my mother. That father that carried his son, that's my father. Wherever I saw the worst of the world, I saw the possibilities of love in the world. Sometimes I despair at the state of our world, and there is a lot to despair about. We're living in a time of environmental disaster. We're living in a time that Pope Francis has already called World War III. There are endless wars, forever wars in our world. We know that there are people tonight who don't know whether tomorrow will come. We live in a world where people have so much and other people have so little. I've lived and worked in the United States and I look at the US election campaign right now. In a country that's meant to be a beacon of hope for the world. A country that's meant to be the last hope for democracy. And a country that can barely govern itself. In America, the top 1% of the population has wealth 13 times greater than the bottom 50% combined. It is criminal. In America, the richest country in the world, for the first time in 100 years, life expectancy is going down. People are dying younger than their parents in the richest country in the world. At a time when there was meant to be so much hope, when Barack Obama became president. An amazing time to see a black man elected president of a country that held black people in slavery. The numbers of deaths of despair. People who were dying out of hopelessness, dying from drug overdose, from gun-inflicted wounds, killing themselves in trailer parks. The numbers of people between the ages of 40 and 55 dying early deaths of hopelessness tripled in a country where they were being told they should have hope. We are capable of doing so much that is wrong to each other. And there are so many people who remain out of sight, the poor, the black, the brown, the marginalised. And yet even in those places, I've seen hope, real hope, not the hope that politicians want to tell us about, but the hope of a mother offering food to a stranger, the hope I saw from my father, the hope I saw from my grandparents. Australia is not untouched by the worst of our democracies. 200 plus years after our country was invaded, our land was taken, Aboriginal people remain the most impoverished and imprisoned people in the country. We know that we have the worst rates of youth suicide, mental illness, the worst education, employment, housing, health outcomes of any other Australians. I look at the way that the struggles of my people are reported in Australia, and it's almost again like it was for me when I was a little boy, a foreign country. Think about it. Whenever there's a reporting on Aboriginal communities, it's always as if it's out there, some other place. If in an Australian town it was more likely for an Aboriginal child to go to jail than go to university, if in an Australian town people were living 30 to a house, if in an Australian town youth suicide was 5 times higher than the rest of the country, we'd do something about it. But this is just in Aboriginal communities. Out of sight, out of mind, just like the poor of America, in the richest countries in the world, the most vulnerable people can suffer the most. We were reminded last year in the referendum year, when we asked Australia to see us, to be better, to give us a voice in a constitution that was originally written to exclude us, to say yes. And I remember sitting there on that night of the referendum, and even in my worst of times, I could not possibly have imagined how quickly that no vote came in. Within a matter of an hour, it was all over. Not one single state in Australia said yes. Not one. The most impoverished and imprisoned people in Australia, Australia found so easy to just say no. It was a hard year for me last year. It was a hard year for a lot of people. But being an Aboriginal person in the public eye, being someone on television, meant that I became a target for hatred. My family was constantly attacked on social media. My children constantly abused. My parents abused. My wife abused. Not just racial abuse, but death threats. One person was arrested and charged for making threats against us. And at that point, I decided to walk away. To walk away from a career that I had loved, a career that had taken me to places I could never have imagined. A career that meant I was the first Aboriginal person to host a nightly current affairs program where I could speak to the most powerful people in the country. But I knew I couldn't stay there. I couldn't stay in a place where my family were going to be targeted in that way. And I could not stay in a media that found it so easy to peddle hatred. When I walked away from hosting Q&A, I said, I don't believe the media has the language or the love to speak to the gentle spirits of our country. Did not have the language or the love. I've thought a lot in the past year about that vote, about our country, about the state of our world, and what we can do about it. I can't stop the wars. I can't stop the rise of despots and autocrats. I can't eradicate poverty. I can't even stop our people going to jail or another generation of Aboriginal kids being raised in hopelessness and despair. But I can begin by changing myself. I had to ask hard questions about my own role in the media, about how I speak to other Australians who found it so easy to say no. Over the past year, I've spent a lot more time back in my own country, connecting to that place that makes me feel whole, filling my spirit. And going back to the lessons that Frank Archibald would have told us, that my grandfathers would have told us, that Aboriginal people never lose our dignity and we never give in to despair. At a time when things could appear so hopeless, I've reconnected to what is the most fundamental thing about us. We are spiritual people. That's what Aboriginal people are. One of the old uncles today, one of the members of the Archibald family, came up to me and he said, "There are 4 things that we are, son." He said, "We're heavenly people. We're earthly people. We're spiritual people. And we're water people." Heaven, earth, spirit, and water. For tens of thousands of years, our people knew what it was to live in a place of God and creation and beauty. We can't be healthy, we can't be healed if our spirits are broken. I've spent so much time in the past year reconnecting to my country, my ancestors, and my spirit. Tonight you would have heard that I've studied for a doctorate in theology. Why theology? Because theology asks the hardest questions. I don't ask if God is real. No Aboriginal person can. Because we live in God's cathedral every day in the beautiful country that God's given us. But I've had to ask, does God care? In the worst places in the world, in the war zones that I've covered, I've cried out, where is God? Where is God in all of this suffering? And then I realised that it's not God that's doing the suffering, inflicting the suffering. It's human beings. There's a wonderful French philosopher, Simone Weil. She said that human beings are reduced to just a thing, something no longer human. She called these people the afflicted. We are the afflicted, the impoverished and imprisoned. We are the afflicted. But she said the inflicted know the truth. Everyone else lies. And the truth is that only love can save us. Only love. Not the love that we see on television, not the love that we read about in books, but the love of where we are in our world, our ancestors, our country, our kinship. The love that we give before we ask to receive. I've reconnected to the idea of Yindyamarra. Yindyamarra is a Wiradjuri way of being. Yindyamarra means to be kind, to be quiet, to be respectful. Yindyamarra Winangana, in my language, means to live with respect in a world worth living in. How do we build a world worth living in? It starts by giving love, even to those people who may want to do us harm, even to the people who hate us. I've had to realise that it's not just enough to tell people about the bad things that have happened on our land. I can't stand here today and talk about history and tell you about how bad things have been unless first I have offered the love for you so that you may hear me. And that's where I went wrong. For too many years I thought I had the truth. I knew what had happened to my people, but I was not offering enough love. My old people have reminded me that first we love. We are people of spirit and we are people of love. It is the only antidote to the hatred in our world. We can't fix our world with politics. We can't vote our way to freedom. We can't expect that justice will be the answer because there is not enough justice for the terrible things that we've done in our world. But there might be enough love. My mother and father are old now. My dad has given back so much to his country. He helped rescue Wiradjuri language. He wrote the first Wiradjuri dictionary. He's taught a whole new generation of Wiradjuri people to speak. Just as you sit here today remembering Frank Archibald and his legacy, Sarah and her legacy, the legacy of your old people. I remember the legacy of my people and my father and my mother. They're old now, but they have never ever stopped loving, and they've never stopped showing dignity. What they ask of me, what they ask of all of us, is to build a better society, to not turn away from the poor, to not turn away from the black, from the brown, from the suffering people. To not look at other people and see an enemy, but to see ourselves. There's a beautiful phrase that a French writer once used. He said, the shortest journey to the self is through the other. The shortest journey to the self is through the other. My faith tells me that we must forgive even those who do us wrong. Love is the only antidote to a world of hate. Yindyamarra is the only response to a country that finds it so easy to say no. I've never stopped being that little boy in that photo. Despite all the things that I've been so fortunate to do in my life, I'm still the scared little boy in that photo, looking out on a world with his eyes full of fear and holding his hands so tightly together they feel as if they're going to break. But I've covered a lot of miles since then. And while I'm still that little boy, the little boy knows that even in the worst of times, there is the hope for a love that transcends the worst of who we are. If anything at all honours the legacy of people like Frank Archibald, if anything honours the legacy of my grandparents, if anything honours the legacy of our ancestors, it is that in a country that finds it so easy to say no, we have to find it within ourselves to say yes to the capacity to love the other person on our country. In my language, Mandangu, thank you. Question?
Okay, do you want to just do it all?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's easy.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. I'd love to hear from you. I love getting questions from people, so I hope that you've got plenty of questions to ask me. I think there are a couple of microphones here and here, so if anyone's put their hand up and be the first, be the brave one, we can go from there.
Najawini, hello. And Murrumboo, thank you, Mr. Stan Grant. And we all sit together, we all people. We all people with beautiful colour. You make us we all together make a rainbow, become one. And we care for land, and we care for our next generation, and we care for all people as together. Maramu, Mr. Grant.
Manangu, thank you. Yep.
This question comes from Matthew De Silva. Matthew asks,
I think I know Matthew. Yeah.
how do we embrace different identities in the notion of love, different histories and notions of self?
Yeah. That's a really, really good question. Identity is a word that we use a lot. And we've embraced that word as a positive word, and there are positive things about that word. But I've come to be very suspect of the word identity. Because every single war that I have reported on, all around the world, starts with the question, who are you? Are you Shia? Are you Sunni? Are you Catholic? Are you Protestant? Are you black? Are you white? Are you Hindu? Are you Muslim? Are you Hutu? Are you Tutsi? Are you Palestinian? Are you Israeli? Every time we ask that question, we set fire to the world. There's a great Indian economist and philosopher, Amartya Sen. He called them solitarist identities. He said solitarist identities shrink our world to one essential thing. And then we go to war against each other. He saw it in India and Pakistan. Hindu and Muslim, torn apart, tens of millions of people killed. I've really grown to not trust the word identity. If I asked my father, do you identify as Wiradjuri, he'd look at me like I've gone mad. I'm a black fella. He's like, he doesn't identify as a black fella. We load that word up with so much weight. It carries so much weight. I want to be seen as a Wiradjuri person. I'm proud of being a Wiradjuri person. I'm proud of being a First Nations person. When I can meet other people here today, we know each other. That matters to me. But that doesn't exclude you. Because I'm a Wiradjuri doesn't mean that you can't belong too. If you're black, it doesn't mean you can't love white. My grandparents proved that wrong. Identity can be like a cage in search of a bird. The bird wants to fly free and we keep putting it in cages. Identity can be a great thing. It can give you a sense of belonging and a sense of home, but not if it comes at the expense of someone else, not if it means you hate somebody. And one thing that I've learned from my people is you knock on our door, you will never be turned away. Never. Thank you.
Thank you, Stan. I recently resigned from a local community organisation because they decided to stop doing the Welcome to Country, and their reason for stopping doing it was that we're all Australians, we're all one people, why do we need to separate them? And I just couldn't take it anymore, and so I just resigned. I don't really understand why, but it really super offended me. Can you tell me how you stand on that? We're all one.
I think we have to change the question. You know, I said to my father once, I said, why do you teach Wiradjuri language to white people? He looked at me and he said, son, language doesn't tell you who you are, it tells you where you are. My father can say the most simple things and just stop me in my tracks. I felt like a stupid little boy. Who was I to say, my language is mine, you can't speak it? But by saying where you are, my father opened his arms to everybody. I think the problem in Australia is that we don't know each other because we've been too busy asking, who are you? Why are you so black? That we don't get to see that the only thing we have is where we are. Could you imagine all the wars of today? Could you imagine, instead of Vladimir Putin saying to Ukrainians, who are you? It started with, where are we? Where are we asks that we share, that we are responsible for each other in a shared place. It begins with a gift, with an offering. welcome. I try not to see those questions of who we are anymore and ask where we are. When I talk about our history and the bad things that have happened in this country, I don't start off by saying what your ancestors did. I start off by saying, these things happened here. Here, in a place we share. What's the first thing blackfellas say to each other? They don't say, who are you? What do you do? Where are you from? Where are you from? What a beautiful way to live in the world. Welcome to country is not about welcoming people to Australia. It's not about saying you're less Australian than me. It's by saying we're here together. What more beautiful thing can there be than to say we're here together, and that this place was held for tens of thousands of years by a beautiful people whose spirit and ancestry lives in us. What a beautiful thing to do. How can anyone say no to that? But we don't ask that question. We make it political. Everything we do is political. Everything we do is about dividing ourselves. You're on this side, you're on that side, I don't like you. We don't disagree anymore, we hate. We can't build a world on that. Sometimes, to be honest with you, I think we just do welcome to country too much. I think that every time we open a door or have a meeting, we've got to do a welcome. It's deeply symbolic and ceremonial. It should be reserved for the times that matter. Anyone can stand up and say, I acknowledge the Anawan people or the Wiradjuri people, and then they go on with their day. I want it reserved for the times that matter. When we come together like we are tonight, and we say, we are here. A land that's been held for us by the Anawan people, who open their arms to us all. If someone can say no to that, then they're saying no to love.
Yeah, g'day Grant. Got to have
brother.
a yarn with you earlier.
Yep.
Bear with me, a bit nervous. But I grabbed the mic because I feel obligated to share a story. I'm here back on country, travelled here for this with my father and my uncle. My name is Joseph Archibald. Grandfather Frank is my great-grandfather, and your story resonated with a part of it. Our story was culture. A lot of culture got lost. Our great-grandfather, my great-grandfather, was a very cultural man, spoke a lot of languages, not just his own. And I've gone on a journey where I was lucky he's recorded a lot of language, and I've been able to start teaching, relearning some of that stuff that my father and his siblings and those generations didn't get the opportunity to learn. And he actually sings a song about this place when the first white people start coming up into this space, and there was always missionaries that were a part of the first movement going into a new area. And he sung a song that was Nyayangangami, Nyayangangami, Waruwai, Mariangan, Goranyayang, Nyayangangami, Nyayangangami. And what that meant was when they had the interaction, he went back to the tribe and he tried to explain what happened, what were these new people. And what that story meant was they have story like us. They're not that different, they have story like us. And if you're a good person and you live a good life, when you go to your creator. So what do I Mariang means? When I go back. And that was the story. So even though land was getting taken, we were getting killed off, in that moment, what was seen was the other people's humanity. They saw their humanity. They like us, they got a story like us. If you're a good person, you live a good life, when you go to your place. Yes. And that's what I want to share. So that's directly from his mouth, his words, a song that he's passed on that now I can pass on. That's from Grandfather Frank, so I just thought I'd share that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I just say to that too, you know, we hear a lot about closing the gap, as if our lives are just an economic measurement. So much of our lives are just reduced to what we can measure. But I tell you, there is a deeper gap, and it's not the gap that we can close with money. I've closed the gap. I've gone from a boy in poverty to a boy who can travel the world. But what our people have and what our society has is what you were talking about, is a deep spiritual hole. Our people are unwell when our spirit is not healed. We are people who know the Creator. We are people of God. Sadly, the invaders who came here couldn't see the God in us when we saw the God in them, as that story said. It is a spiritual hole. Democracy won't fix it. Voting won't fix it. Taxes won't fix it. They may give us better roads and better schools and better hospitals, and we need it. But there is a deep spiritual loss, not just for my people, but for all people. You know, I look at our country and I think about that no vote. And then I realise that we live in a society of Uber Eats and married at first sight. And I'm serious about this. When you can order food and never have to look the human being in the eye who makes it or delivers it. When we are so cold that we never need to touch the hand of another human being who brings us food, and then we can sit down and watch a television program where human beings turn their lives into an amusement park for desperate love, for the idea of a love that we laugh at. We tune in. The most watched program in Australia is a program where we watch people humiliate themselves for the most precious gift that a human being can ever have, the gift of love. A world of Uber Eats and married at first sight is a world that can never say yes. We need to think about the choices we make and the society that we're building. And it starts with that story you told me. If you're a good person, if you love and you're kind, and you go to your Creator, then you're one of us. But we live in a world where we laugh at each other. We can't even touch the hand of people who bring us our food.
Thank you. Another online question. What role can education, and in particular tertiary education, play in raising awareness of some of the issues you speak about?
That's a good question. You know, I mean, I thought I was stupid when I was a kid, and I was told I was stupid, and I was told that I would amount to nothing. And when I turned up in whatever school I was turning up at, I sat at the back of the class and I never put my hand up. It's astonishing to me that I'd stand here today and I've got a PhD in theology and I've travelled the world and I studied physics and philosophy, and what my education gave me was not just things that I'd learned, it opened me to other people. I really despair at a lot of education today. I despair at the messages that our young people get, which is that it is all about yourself, that we're self-created. I really despair at an education that can tell people to stay in their own lanes, where we don't feel as if we can share in the human experience of another person. One of the great joys of my life has been opening myself to the stories of other people, the stories that I've reported on and the stories that I've read. When my favourite novelists don't have to be Aboriginal. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, speaks to my soul as an Aboriginal person. When he writes about love, I know what that means. When I stand in the Sistine Chapel and I look at Michelangelo's unbelievable painting on the ceiling and I see the outreached hands of Adam and God, that's my story too. When I go to New York or Rome or Paris or London, I walk down those streets as a Wiradjuri person in the world. Education should not put us in boxes. Education should not divide us from other people. Education should not pit us against each other. Education should tell us that the shortest journey to you is the other person, the love of the other person. So that's what education has done for me. It's told me that I'm not alone, and that in this room tonight are people who've come from all different backgrounds. We're breathing the same air, we're sharing the same space, and our stories are the one story, multiple stories that meet each other in one place. That's what education is for me. Thank you, Aunt.
I'll make a statement first. Us blackfellas must be the most stubbornest people that God ever put on earth, for the simple reason of the atrocities that have come into our lives, starting from way back, from our ancestors, my great-grandfather, mothers, the stolen generation, the no vote. Like, how many times we get knocked down? How many times?
How many times?
We get back up, we go again, we try something, we come into a different... I suppose I want to ask you, travelling the world, you would have seen a lot of, black people and their resilience, the same as us. And they just keep going and keep going. Materialistic things have never been anything for us. You don't ring up and say, I'm coming with all the kids, just move over, pull the clothes out of the cupboard, make a bed on the floor.
Yep.
That type of thing. So I'm asking, Stan, why do you think white people are so afraid of black people?
It's a really good question. It's a really good question. And I'll tell you, because it's a fear of love. It has to be. It has to be. When white people came here, our people showed them the best water, the best land, opened their arms to them. We went to them last year with our arms open. Still. I think it is a fear of love. And I don't want to use the word white because it's an idea. To talk about white people, I separate the human beings from the idea. My grandmother was white and she was a beautiful woman. But the white idea is an idea that the human being, human rationality, controls all. It's an experiment. We live in a modern world where the idea that what we think, what we can know, determines our world. We look at other people who are different and judge them because we see them as somehow inferior to us. Human beings are not the limit of the world. And look where it's leading us. It's leading us to a world of environmental catastrophe, endless war, weapons that can destroy the planet many times over, criminal, immoral levels of wealth inequality, hunger, homelessness in the richest places on earth. The human being is on the verge of becoming obsolete when artificial intelligence and robots may make us redundant. This is the world we've created. It is an idea. It is an idea that has been associated with whiteness as a colour, with a whiteness that says, I've got the right to ask you, why are you so black? Because I never have to ask, why am I so white? But it is the idea that's poisonous, not the people, not the human beings. I go to America and I see white people just discarded, tossed aside, living in abject poverty. People, you know, their factories are shut down, their homes are dilapidated. They don't know who to turn to. They may turn to Donald Trump out of absolute desperation. It is not the people, it is the idea. The idea that human beings are dispensable. The idea that we can create the world of our own making. Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, in one of his books, he has a madman running into the marketplace and he says, God is dead and we have killed him. That's the idea. The death of God. Aboriginal people, black people, people all around the world know something that this idea of the modern world doesn't know. Human beings are not the limit. The world doesn't begin and end with us. It begins with a creator, begins with a spirit. It begins with a universe that is bigger than all of us. We know where we go. We'll go back to rejoin our ancestors and our creator. The world can't take any more of the idea of what we see as whiteness, because it's hurting white people too.
Oh, hello, Stan. So my name's Hazel, and you're actually challenging. You're challenging us tonight. I've been challenged about the identity, because we, in our community, we are very divided in our Aboriginal community, and I say this with respect, not to thing. And I look at my dear old auntie down there, Auntie Hazel Green, a strong Gumbaynggirr woman, and so with the idea of identity, you know, I do cultural women's business.
Yeah.
I have a yarning circle every fortnight, and it was just for First Nation women, but it's become more than that. We have all different. We have non-Aboriginal women coming, and it's not about sorry, but I don't believe in reconciliation, because it's not like that. It's about coming together, connecting, and no more Aboriginal people down here, but we on equal levels now. And so you're really challenging me about the identity stuff, because I struggle with both some of my tribal ancestry, and you know, so. Yeah, sorry, I don't know how to put this, but I've just been really challenged.
Yeah, thank
and I
you.
do welcome to countries as well. And it is not about welcoming to our country. It's about, for me, it's about a showcasing our culture, a celebration, you know. And yeah, I've been really challenged
thank
tonight
you.
about what you're saying.
Thank you. Oh, look, I mean, you know what? I challenge myself all the time. It starts with me, because I have to recognise that where I've gone wrong. And, you know, you can't speak truth without love. You can't do it. Truth's not enough without love. We hear a lot about truth-telling, and we need to tell the truth of our history. I don't think Australia's got a problem with the truth. I think by now we all know the truth. There's been enough said, enough written, enough books, enough stories. I think we do have a problem with love. As I said, in a world where Married at First Sight is the most popular television program, we can laugh at love. And I'm talking about the love that comes from the depths of our soul. And I've had to go back and reconnect with that and learn that again. Because I was in a world of media where all we did was hate. All we did was pit people against each other, put people into arguments, pick each side. It's so easy to do that. And what you've talked about tonight with your yarning circle is to bring people into a circle, all people, to share. Not the same. I love our difference. I love the fact that my friends come from all different parts of the world and they speak different languages and we have different cultures and we have different food and we have different histories. And sometimes we disagree. And sometimes people have gone to war. But war doesn't last forever. What do you do? What do you do? There's a beautiful story that I learned from a man. He's a theologian. He works at Yale University. His name is Miroslav Volf. And he wrote a book. He grew up in Croatia, the old Yugoslavia, and his family was forged by the Yugoslav wars, wars that were just horrendous. And he was once asked, could he forgive, could he embrace a Serbian after what the Serbian fighters had done to Croatians? And he said, no, I can't. And then he said, but I must. Wars don't last forever, but love might. Identity is not love. The only answer is, even in the face of hatred, to find a way to speak to each other. That's what I'm trying to do. Every time I'm asked to give a talk, when I was asked to come here and give this talk, I did not hesitate. I said yes immediately because I wanted to be amongst you people. And I wanted to say something good. Because last year we had so much that was ugly. And I ask myself two things now before I do anything. I ask myself, by doing this, will I contribute to conflict? And we can do that sometimes even with the best motives. I can stand up here and tell you the truth of my history and the things that have happened, and people will block their ears. People may even want to use it against me. But if I stand here and I offer them love, and I bring them into this place, and I embrace them, and then I say, we've got to talk about these things, people change, they soften. I ask myself, will I contribute to conflict? The second thing I ask myself is, will we be reduced by this? The media, politics, it reduces us. It shrinks our world. It pits us against each other. I want to do things that enlarge our spirit. And that's the beautiful thing about being here tonight, that I felt enlarged and healed and loved by the people who welcomed me here and by all of you who have been here to listen. Is there another one?
Oh, yeah.
I just find, is that working? Your storytelling is very captivating, and I was wondering what books you would recommend with communication skills and like storytelling books or audiobooks.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I built a house back out on my country, Wiradjuri country, because I wanted to be back out there on my own land. I still live in Sydney, but I spend as much time as I can back out on my land. I'm really lucky to have a place there and some land. And one of the things that I built was a library, because over the years I've collected about 20,000 books. And I read every day. I read maybe 10 books at a time. I try every year to read about 500 books. And I just love it. You know, I love literature. But before I could stand here and recommend a whole lot of books to you, and there are things, maybe you can come and talk to me later and I can tell you about some. But the greatest stories I learned were from my mother and my father and my grandparents and my people. The greatest stories are here in this room. The stories that I shared in this afternoon, hearing people laugh, seeing people with each other, sharing food with each other. Our life is a story. That's what it is. So I would say to you, open yourself to the stories around you. I was terrified when I was a kid to say a word. I could never speak in front of an audience. When I first went into journalism, my hand used to shake every time I held the microphone. But I realised something, it's not about me. When I stand up here and talk to you tonight, I'm not talking about me. I may talk about the things that I've seen, the things that I've done, about my family. It's about you. It's about trying to share a story that opens us up to each other. So I would say to you, listen to the stories that are around you. Don't think about what you've got to say, think about what other people have got to tell you. And when it comes to books, the very first novel that really floored me, I think, was a book by James Baldwin. It's called Go Tell It on the Mountain. I read it when I was about 14, and it changed my life because he was a black man, a black writer, writing about black people in a way that I'd never heard before or read before. And it wasn't as if everybody in the book was a good person, but they were real. They were real people, and they were black people. And that opened me to a world of literature that's taken me around the world. So that's a good place to start. And the other thing is, my grandfather gave me, he died, my dad's father, when I was only 5 or 6 years old, so I barely have a lot of memory of him. But he left me his Bible. You know, my grandfather was a Wiradjuri man who spoke his own language. And by his bed, he had the Bible and the works of William Shakespeare. They're our stories too. That Bible story, that's our story too. William Shakespeare, that's our story too. Because we are all just one story. We're done? One more? Yeah, I got one more.
This
Offline,
question,
online, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
online comes from Eleanor. What do you think the media could do to address conversations of identity better, and how can they perpetuate conversations of hate less?
Sorry, what was the first bit? What do I think?
What do you think the media could do?
Oh, the media. Oh my God. I don't know. You know, I don't know. But listen, to be honest with you, the best thing you could do sometimes is just turn it off. No, I'm serious. You know, when you're inside the machine, when you look at the way the media works, you see the cynicism, the ugliness, the ego, the constant friction. The first thing they do when you sit down for an editorial conference is they want to know where the suffering is, where the hatred is, where the violence is. You put two people in a room, they don't want two people to have a conversation. They want to choose one person on one side, another person on another side, and watch them yell at each other. When I was hosting Q&A, we'd have conferences about who we're going to put on the panel, and someone would always go, but who's going to bring the anger? As if we need more of that. I don't think the media tells us about our world at all. You turn the television news, and it's just endless crime and violence. We don't learn about our world. We don't look at... Every day I see people doing heroic, beautiful things. People who are looking after elderly. People who are teaching children. People who are cleaning toilets. People who are serving us our coffee. People who are driving trucks delivering our milk and our bread. Ordinary people doing things every day. We're not at each other's throats. We're not tearing each other apart, but you listen to the media, and that's what we get constantly. The media feeds on conflict. The model is broken. They've lost trust with the audience, and the audience has lost trust in them. The readership and viewership of media is at an all-time low. But rather than look at what they're doing, they become ever more desperate. They're looking for the next big headline, the next big gotcha moment. I think we're better off to turn it off and speak to each other. We don't need the media to speak for us. Thank you. Pam.
Thanks, Dan. Look, I want to share a story with you first. And I agree with Hazel up the back about identity, the word identity. In my past life, I used to interview Year 12 leavers applying for scholarships to become teachers in the Department of Education. And one of the first questions was, can you please explain how you identify as Aboriginal in the community? So I'd ask a lot of people, hundreds and hundreds of students, this question. Then one day I interviewed this young lady and I said to her, can you please explain to me how you identify as Aboriginal in the community? And she looked at me really, really stupid. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, well, how do you identify within the community? She said, well, I'm black. I was born black. She said, I don't know anything else but being black. So she said, what do you mean? She said, everything I do is about me and being black. And so listening to you tonight with Identity and Hazel up the back and other people making the comments, I think some agencies, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal, need to start changing some of the way they ask questions, especially of those people that are Aboriginal, whether you can see quite clearly that they are Aboriginal or not, that they need to rephrase how they ask that question.
Yeah.
Because I'm an Aboriginal person, and when I go out and I mix with my non-Aboriginal friends, I'm still the same person.
Still the same, yeah.
I don't say to them, oh, I'm a white Aboriginal now because I'm over here, or I'm a black Aboriginal. I'm the same person. Yeah. So I think we need to...
You know, it's funny, the perceptions people have. The funny thing is, when I was a kid, I was a black kid. And I was a poor kid. When I went to university, I was a black kid. And then when I got into television, I started being on TV, people started to say, oh, yeah, but you're not like the others. One person I heard one day saying, oh, what would Stan Grant know about being Aboriginal? He's a white person. He lives in a house by the beach and drives a BMW. What? I can drive whatever I want. I just think it's absurd, the things that we twist ourselves into these things. We're constantly putting ourselves in boxes. Every time we fill out any form, we're asked, are you Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander? No one in Australia has to answer this. No one else. And how can that box tell us who we are? How can it? First of all, it doesn't include my grandmother, who's a white woman. But she was part of my community. She had Aboriginal children. What's she? What, she's not part of my story now? She's not in that box. It is a ridiculous idea. I know why they do it, and they have to collect numbers. You've got to have government data and all the rest of it. But someone ticks that box who's never grown up in our communities, or maybe they've just discovered they've got some Aboriginal ancestry or whatever. That's not the same. I'm not saying they don't have a right to be Aboriginal, but it's not the same as our experience growing up in our communities. Boxes are not people. And we are too often putting people into boxes that exclude us from others. We'll say what it is to be black. We don't need a box to do it.
Thank you, Stan, for your lecture. It was amazing. I'm sure everyone can agree. Thank you, everyone, for the discussion and all the questions tonight. Now I would like to ask our CEO and Vice-Chancellor, Professor Chris Moran, to come up and present a vote of thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. I acknowledge the place where we meet tonight has many stewards since time began. The land has never been ceded in this place. I particularly acknowledge such an audience of mob tonight in so many places, from so many places, to gather here. In some ways, because a lady called Dr. Lynette Riley, who I had an opportunity to thank after her talk recently, had the concept and created the place of Arala And the place of Arala is now a gathering place, a welcoming place here that provided the opportunity, Stan, for us to also have the focus for the legacy of Archibald to continue tonight. So can I thank the Arala team for tonight and for maintaining a long-term legacy, and to acknowledge not only the elders in the audience tonight, there are many elders in our audience tonight, but all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who have come to listen, to be challenged, to learn, and I think to hear incredible words from a person who's walked a journey. And I will reflect back to you some of your journey if I'm permitted to do that, Stan. I don't feel comfortable in a sense calling you Stan after where we've just been, so I think I will refer to you as Dr. Grant. I don't feel the sense of familiarity, somewhat ironically, with the topic of love in front of us, but you've given us and you've challenged us very directly by saying to us that you're talking to us about a familiar story tonight. And in making that statement, you challenge pretty much everybody in the audience from their origin as to what is familiar to each of us about the story and the way that you told your story from the beginning. But I wanted to start first by reflecting on what I felt. I kind of come to the word horror, and that's the horror that was my response to your very reflective and challenging question, why are you so black? A power question with no answer. You've told us that, you've taken us through that, and you will amount to nothing. The question that I came to, this is the horror component for me in a sense of what you've said here. We all have, I think, something in our lives that touches us a little in that vein, and so we have the ability to empathise with what you've said, but I don't know that we can all own what you've said in the way your history tells us we could. But one thing I would say is, how can these things still be said? And why does the question I've just posed not be answered? And it's come from the audience tonight very much that these questions are still being posed in many ways, and they should be, the question as to why they can be said should be answered. You then, for me, Stan, took us on a wild journey, and in some sense I want to reverse a little bit the journey back to you that you gave us, and the concept of, and the picture you gave us of travelling every night looking for somewhere to belong. And then you found where you belong, which was back on the country, to reconnect to country, heaven, earth, spirit and water. It was clear where you belonged. You had to come to that journey. But I thought the path, reversing the path of coming to the place of belonging, was worth replaying. The place of belonging came to you, had to come to you through personal and family vilification from a nation that said no. From a perspective, Australia as a foreign place, back to the war grandfather not recognised in his home. And then your reflection today, and today, what's today? The truth is that in so many ways, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people of today are still out there, on the margin, on the fringe somewhere. It's a powerful story, and you've said to us, that's your history, that's our present. Dr. Grant, that's our present. You then have pulled us out of a sense of despair, and for me that sense of horror of that why are you so black question. And you took us through the audacity of love. The love you've seen in the worst places. The reflection and the answer to the question towards the end. A media that doesn't deserve our attention because the media does not have the language or love to talk to our people. And you've told us there's only one people here. I think you've made a powerful statement. And as a reflection, not of tonight, I don't know how many people saw you give your reasoning for stepping away on the media, on the TV. As an Australian, I was completely taken by surprise. I don't know you or your story as I now do tonight. But I think one of the audience said it as well. You left me in tears in front of my TV for that simple reason that you replace the hatred that was given to you with a response of love and step away. And you've come to it again and again in the story tonight. Give love even to those who hate us. And the final one for me, and as you've walked through there, hope for the love that transcends, because you touched on hope many times there. So for me, there is what I would call a growing familiar story here. I had the opportunity when I was living in Western Australia to become reasonably close to two elder Aboriginal men, probably men that are not known here. Michael Wright, some may know of Kim Scott, the author. What those two men allowed me to learn in a short journey of a few years with them was how gentle this sense of approach of many of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in our country provide to us when met with force, met with hatred, and met with the attempt to be put in the cage in search of a bird. So, Dr. Grant, I'd like to finish by thanking you for showing us tonight what it means to walk proud with powerful, gentle dignity. We are that history and we are the future that you've posed for us tonight. Can I please ask you to thank Dr. Grant for a very inspiring speech.
Thanks, Chris. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor Moran. We now have a gift for Stan, if I can invite Larissa up with all of that to present these. So the gift for Stan is obviously thank you for presenting the wonderful lecture, and there's a frame photo and some other goodies that I wasn't prepared for. And Auntie Hazel and Uncle Richard received a gift earlier this evening as a token of our appreciation. So that concludes our event for this evening. Thank you to everyone who has attended and everyone who's attended online. For those driving, please drive home safely and have a nice night.